everyone! In this video, I'll be showing you how to use the Quick Selection tool to mask an object onto a new background. I'll also be using Liquify and other techniques to create an artistic surreal portrait from a photograph. Let's get started. I've done all my color adjustments in Lightroom, and now I've opened my photograph in Photoshop. I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut F to make my artboard take up the entire screen. Now I can zoom in and out of my image easily and hold down spacebar to move my image around. The first thing I'm going to do is use Command J to duplicate my layer. I'm going to name my background layer Alice. To do this, I'm going to double click on the word Layer 1. Now I'm going to use the Quick Selection tool to make a selection of the subject in my layer. Making sure I have my subject layer selected, I'm going to select the Quick Selection tool on my toolbar. It's the fourth tool down, or you can use the keyboard shortcut W. If yours doesn't look like this, you can right click or click and hold to make sure that you've selected the Quick Selection tool. I'm going to use the left and right brackets to adjust my cursor so that I can easily start painting over the parts that I want to be in my selection. If you select an area that you don't want to be in your selection, hold down the Option key while painting it out. This tool allows us to do a basic selection that we will refine later on. Once you've completed your selection, you're going to click on the Layer Mask tool. It's at the bottom of your screen underneath your Layers palette. Now that we've masked out our selection, we're going to turn off our background to see what it looks like. The black areas of our layer mask show what is below. Since we've turned off our background, it's empty. Before we refine our selection, we're going to go ahead and add our new background. Open up your new background image in Photoshop and drag that layer onto your new file. Once that image pops up onto the screen, drag your layer on top of it and let go. We're going to convert this new layer into a Smart Object. To do so, you're going to right-click on that layer and select Convert to Smart Object. Now I'm going to rename this layer Wallpaper. To do that, I'm going to double click on Layer 1 and type in Wallpaper. Now I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Command T to resize my layer to fit my background. Now I'm going to drag my new background layer to below my subject layer. Before I start refining the edges of my subject selection, I'm going to make adjustments to my wallpaper layer so that it replicates the lighting setup I had when I shot this photograph. I'm going to create a new layer using the keyboard shortcut Shift-Command-N. I'm going to name this layer White Background. I'm going to drag this layer below my wallpaper layer. Now I'm going to fill it with white. To do this, I'm going to go to Edit, Fill, and select white for my content. Now I'm going to select my wallpaper layer and create an adjustment layer. To do that, I'm going to click on my Adjustments palette. Now I'm going to select the Curves layer. It's the one in the top middle. I'm going to change the blending mode to Screen. I'm going to click this curves layer to my wallpaper by selecting this icon here, or you can also do it by right-clicking and selecting clipping mask. My original photography setup had light coming in from the left side, and so I need the right-hand side of my wallpaper to be darker. I'm going to select the gradient tool on my tool palette or use the keyboard shortcut G. Making sure that I have white selected as my foreground color and black selected as my background color, I'm going to select on the left side of my screen and drag it to the right. Now you can see that the background now matches more naturally the lighting setup that I used when I took this photograph. To further replicate a natural photograph, I'm going to add some blur to my background layer to replicate my depth of field. Selecting my wallpaper layer, I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, and Gaussian Blur. Now I'm ready to fine-tune my layer mask. To do this, I'm going to select the layer mask that's on my subject. Now up in my Properties panel, I'm going to click on Select and Mask. This is a special menu where we can make adjustments to our selection mask. The first thing we want to do is change our view mode. Up on the top right-hand corner of our screen, you'll see a little tiny picture of your image. Click on that to change your view mode. For darker subjects, choose on white. For lighter subjects, choose on black. This gives you the most contrast between your subject and the background. We're going to choose onion skin as our viewing mode. This shows us the layers below our subject layer on our layers palette. We can adjust the transparency by using these sliders. On the panel on the right, you'll see global adjustments that you can make to your overall selection. I'm going to add a little bit of smoothness to my selection just to give me a head start. This smooths out any ridges from my quick selection. Now I'm going to use the toolbar on the left-hand side to make individual adjustments to my selection. The first brush that I'll be using is the Refine Edge brush tool. You can also use the keyboard shortcut R. I'm going to hold down the space bar to move my image around and use Command plus and minus to zoom into my image. I'm going to use the left and right brackets to adjust my cursor and keep them as tight as possible. Now I'm going to drag my cursor along the edge of my selection so that it can refine the edges. This gives me a much smoother transition between my subject and my new background layer. If the original background behind your subject is similar in color to your actual subject, then the Refine Edges tool might not be the best fit. To help this, you can switch over to the brush tool. Set your hardness to around 80 to 90% for a natural photography edge. Just like with our quick selection, you can paint over your image to add to your selection, or hold down the Option key to remove parts of your image from your selection. Switch back and forth between the two brushes until you have the desired effect around your selection to blend in seamlessly with your photograph. Once you've refined your selection, you can shift the edge so that your selection merges a little bit closer in by dragging the slider to the left. If you drag it to the right, it'll expand your selection. When you're done, click OK in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Photoshop has automatically turned off our old selection layer and created a new one on top of it. Now we're ready to start retouching and fine-tuning our image. The first thing we want to do is to convert our subject layer into a smart object. You're going to do that by right-clicking and selecting Convert to Smart Object. Now I'm going to make my model look more surreal by using the Liquify tool. Making sure that my subject layer is selected, I'm going to go to Filter and then Liquify. The most commonly used tool in Liquify is the Warp tool. It's the tool at the very top of the tool palette. You can get there by using the keyboard shortcut W. I'm going to use my left and right brackets to adjust the size of my cursor, and then I can start warping my image. If you need to warp an area of your image without moving another area of your image, you can apply a freeze layer mask. To do this, you can select on the freeze mask tool or use the keyboard shortcut F. Now you can paint on the area of your image where you would not like anything to be moved while you're warping. Now when I go back to my warp tool and start warping, the area where the mask is will not budge. When you're done with your freeze mask, you can get rid of it by using the Thaw tool. It's right below the freeze mask tool, or you can use the keyboard shortcut D. Now you can paint away your freeze mask so that you can warp the entire image again. Another Liquify tool that we'll be using is the Bloat tool. It's the sixth one down on your tool palette. You can also use the keyboard shortcut B. This tool allows you to increase the size of areas of your image. I'm toggling between the Warp tool and the Bloat tool to enhance my image. The opposite of the Bloat tool is the Pucker tool. This allows you to shrink areas of your image. When you're satisfied with your edit, select OK. We're also going to be distorting the perspective of our subject on our image. To do this, we're going to make sure that our subject layer is selected and then go to Edit, Transform, and then Perspective. This dialog box lets us know that we will not be able to see our smart filters while we're in transformation mode, but they'll still be applied when we're done. When you're satisfied with your new perspective, just hit Enter. Now I'm going to create a new layer and use the healing brush and the stamp tool to retouch my image. To create my new layer, I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Shift-Command-N. I'm going to start with the spot healing brush. You can select the band-aid on your tool palette or just use the keyboard shortcut J. Make sure you have checked Sample All Layers at the top of your screen. I'm going to take my hardness down to 50%. If you switch over to the stamp tool, make sure you have selected Current and Below for your sample. Then use Option to select your sample area. I like to keep my opacity at 30% and my brush hardness at 0. Now I'm going to create an adjustment layer to highlight my image. To do that, I'm going to go to Adjustments and click on Curves. I'm going to change the blending mode to Screen. Now I'm going to invert the layer mask by using the keyboard shortcut Command-I. Using my paintbrush tool, I'm going to select white as my foreground color and then paint everywhere that I would like to highlight my image. I'm going to make sure that my brush is at 0 hardness and it's at 15% opacity. If you find that you have done too much, you can just hit X to switch between your foreground color and your background color and paint back over your area with black. I'm going to rename my highlighting curves layer Dodge. Now I'm going to create a new adjustment layer so that I can burn down areas of my image that I'd like to be darker. I'm going to go to Adjustments, add another curves layer, and change the blending mode to Multiply. I'm going to invert my layer mask with the keyboard shortcut Command-I. Now I'm ready to paint with white onto my layer mask anywhere that I want my image to be dark. If you notice anything you need to retouch, just go back to that retouching layer and add to it. I'm going to rename this layer Burn. Now I'm going to use some artistic brushes to neaten up the hair and add extra strands to it to give it a more painterly effect. To do this, I'm going to create a new layer using the keyboard shortcut Shift-Command-N and name it Hair. Make sure that this layer is at the top of your layers palette. I'm going to select a different brush from my brush palette. I'm going to set my opacity to 50% and use the Option key to select multiple different tones from my hair as I'm painting. Now I'm going to add some eyelashes to my model using special eyelash brushes. I'm going to put each eyelash on its own layer so that it can be manipulated individually. To transform this eyelash to the perfect shape, I'm going to use the transform tool. This allows me to fit the eyelashes perfectly to my model's eye. To create the right eyelash, I'm just going to duplicate my left eyelash layer by using Command J and then flipping it horizontally in the Properties panel. I'm going to switch to my Move tool by using the keyboard shortcut V. Now I'm going to use the same technique as before to manipulate this eyelash to fit the eye. I'm going to rename this layer to the right eyelash. Now I'm going to do the bottom eyelashes. Now I can adjust the opacity of my eyelashes to make them feel a little more natural. Now I'm going to create a group of my subject and all the adjustments I've made to them so that I can create an adjustment layer that clips just to that group. To do that, I'm going to select all the layers that are altering my subject. Now I'm going to create an adjustment layer to darken my subject. I'm going to control click on that layer and select Create Clipping Mask. This applies the changes only to my subject. Now I can adjust it to get it the way I want it. I can always expand my Alice layer group to make additional adjustments. I can make adjustments to the background and change its color by creating an adjustments layer. Make sure that you have your wallpaper selected, go to Adjustments, and select Hue Saturation. Now I can adjust the hue of my background by moving the slider left or right. Just make sure you have the clipping mask icon selected. If you don't want it clipped, deselect it. If you would like to keep the background the color as it is, then you can just toggle the eye off so that you don't see this layer mask, or you can drag it to the trash can. Now that I'm done editing my image, I'm ready to crop it. Before I crop it, I'm going to save it as a PSD because once I crop it, I can't undo it. Before we can crop our image, we need to merge all of our layers together. To do that, we're going to flatten our image. Click on the three little bars on the right-hand corner of your layers palette and select Flatten Image. This is going to discard any layers that you didn't have visible and merge all of your layers together. It's very important to make sure that you've already saved all of your layers in a full-size PSD before you do this step. This image will be saved as a separate file. Now that all of our layers have been flattened into one layer, we're ready to crop. To get to the crop tool, select C on your keyboard. We're going to select 4x5, 8x10 as our ratio, and make sure that Delete Cropped Pixels is selected. Once you have the crop you like, just hit Enter. Now you're ready to save this file as a full-size JPEG. Now your image is complete.